Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So let me make sure I am up. My wife, I often tell my wife if there's a subject that she wants me to talk about, let me know. Usually she doesn't take me up on this, but every so often she does, in which case I feel more inclined to talk about the thing that she wanted me to talk about. We were having a conversation on guns. And she has friends of hers that are ensconced in the gun culture. Now, we ourselves own guns. I own a shotgun, and her and I used to go for gun lessons and shooting and stuff like that. I enjoy it. Let's have an adult conversation about guns. Like, we recently had the march, I think it was a couple of days ago, of all of these kids from all of these states walking out of their schools saying enough is enough. We're having mass violence. They're shooting us in our goddamn schools. We're supposed to be there studying, looking at books, talking to girls, talking to boys. But instead, we're talking about getting bulletproof vests or bulletproof book bags and stuff to that nature. We're talking about things that kids should never really ever have to talk about. Enough is enough. Now, personally, I commend them on that march. And they should be commended on that march. Anytime I see somebody taking public activism and taking beyond the complacency that we typically ensconce ourselves in is a good thing. Meaning those kids breaking out and saying, my forefathers, my parents' generation has failed us tremendously. And we ourselves are going to take on the mantle of trying to get change in regards to guns or in regards to mass shootings. Because understand, what they're arguing about is this thing of we shouldn't be killed in our classrooms, and we're having one mass shooting after the next. There's something problematic about this. We need to address this. They should be commended for marching on this. They should be commended for getting out of their complacency and coming out and making a statement about it and being pissed off and stomping their feet saying enough is enough. That's the first point. The second point, their position is going to be eaten up by the Democratic Party, who is going to absorb their political position of enough is enough, because Democrats can pivot themselves almost freely against the NRA and the gun lobby. Their donors, this doesn't in any way affect their donors, in which case they could be pretty strong and ballsy about going after these guys, and they will be. Now, the catch is, the Democratic position is just looking for tepid regulation. Essentially, like, we want to have gun checks, or at the very least background checks for the people who own their guns. There's nothing wrong with that. You should have background checks. But let's be honest, that's not going to solve the issue. I mean, come on. That's political acting, purely for the sake of political acting. It's busy work to get across this idea that we're doing something, even though the thing that we're doing is not really going to solve the issue. It doesn't even address the issue. It doesn't even ask questions about the issue. It's prescribing something when it hasn't even checked the patient to figure out what's wrong with the patient. In this case, the patient being the American public. I take the kids as being earnest. The party itself, the Democratic Party itself, not so much. Not so much. If you really want to solve an issue, coming up with a prescription for it without actually looking into what's causing it is not the way to do it. That is posturing. That is political acting. That is something different than actually trying to get to the bottom of a problem and trying to solve that particular societal problem. Because let's call it what it is. It is an epidemic. It is a societal ill. It's not something that's happening to one person or another person. It's happening a lot. And the fact that it's happening a lot gives some indication that it's not just a one-off. It's not just purely from an individualistic standpoint that the problem exists. It's societal. Now, the right-wing position on this is even more absurd. This, look, using the Second Amendment and screaming about the Second Amendment, saying, I have my rights, Second Amendment rights, the Constitution gives me the right to hold this weapon. Please understand, that's not a defense of anything. Somebody wrote something down in a document, so what? At the end of the day, there's a societal impetus that requires us to look at the external impact of a particular law or a particular thing. The Constitution is an expanding document. It expands and contracts in the way that it needs to expand and contract for the age that the people are in. Having something written down is not necessarily the same thing, meaning the existence of that document or existence of that amendment in and of itself is not necessarily a reason for guns to be used in the way that they're used. You having this thing written down in a document that you can form a militia, the very existence of it does not necessarily legitimize the existence of it. Just because it's there doesn't necessarily mean that it should be there. And if there are negative consequences that are externalized on the society itself, that very society can come together and make a decision to change that document. The existence of the Second Amendment is not in and of itself a justification of anything. That's my point. It can be changed. It can be nixed. It's almost like saying, because slavery was allowed, we should always allow slavery. That's a ridiculous proposition. At some point, they passed an amendment in order to get rid of slavery. Most of it, 13th Amendment, still exists. But the point I'm making is, just because something existed in a document or was allowed by a document is not necessarily indicative of a justification for that particular thing to continue to exist. Screaming about your Second Amendment rights is not a justification for protecting your guns or for you to hold on to your guns. That's my point. I, like anybody else, including these kids, have a right to exist. In the same way that you have a right to exist, I have a right to exist. And somebody walking around with a hand cannon because they're terrified and that can snuff my life out in the blink of an eye. Now, that's not choice for me. That's not protection for me. That's not any of that stuff. And I understand that the overwhelming majority of people may not use guns in this way, but clearly there are people that do use guns in this way that are allowed to snuff out other people's lives. Now, we force people to get a lesson when they're going to drive a car, and a car is not used explicitly to murder people. Yes, you can use it for that, but ultimately it's used for driving. It looks like the same should be held for guns. Like, I don't understand the special place that guns get in our particular society where any random Joe Schmo can get their hands on these things. These things are killing weapons. They're tools to murder and to take out other human beings off the game board. Walking around with these things in normal, everyday society, you can make an argument for it, but let's be honest, there should be a little bit more rules and regulation regarding the way that these things are held and regarded. Also, let's make another point. Unless your position is, it is okay to walk around with a missile launcher, a handheld missile launcher, meaning I go to Starbucks, I sit down to get a soy milk hazelnut cappuccino, and I have a missile launcher with me, and I sit my missile launcher beside me as I drink my cappuccino. Should I be able to walk around with a grenade launcher? What about a handheld nuclear device? I'm asking, what is the limits? Meaning, even if you go with this argument of the Second Amendment and that you have some right, some God-given right to hold your guns, are there limits to the weapons that you have? If I am a private billionaire, should I be allowed to build a nuclear bomb in my basement? If you say no, then at the very least you believe that there should be limits on what people have, and those limits are purely based on this idea of external, or let's call it societal ramifications. Like, what I mean by that is, if you're saying, no, I don't want to have a missile launcher, or we shouldn't allow people to have missile launchers, why? Why not? Why shouldn't we allow people to have bombs? Why shouldn't we allow people to walk around with missile launchers? Why shouldn't we allow people to, if you had a billionaire and that billionaire wanted to build a nuclear bomb, why not? Now, the reason that the why not comes into this is societal impact. There is a negative societal impact for somebody to just walk around with a nuclear weapon like that. If you say that there are limits, then you've just said that there are limits, and we can agree on what those limits are. At the very least, we can have an argument as to where those limits should be. Meaning, even if you agree that the Second Amendment should exist, if you also agree with me that people shouldn't be able to walk around with nuclear weapons and handheld missile launchers, then you also agree that there is a limit. And that limit is determined purely by societal impact. After all, the only reason you would say that a person shouldn't have a missile launcher is because of the negative societal consequences for that person having a missile launcher. So even from that standpoint, even from that conversation, I don't give legitimacy to the Second Amendment because it's words on a page that can be changed based on societal impact. In the same way we're having a conversation about societal impact now with people walking around with missile launchers. Even if I give you your point, though, about the Second Amendment, you're still stuck at this thing of what is the scale and weaponry that regular people should have in the country. I don't think that's a trivial conversation. And again, if you're agreeing with me that they shouldn't have missile launchers and nuclear devices, then you're agreeing with me that there's a negative societal consequence to having certain weapons. And our conversation at that point is, what's the level where we say, okay, nothing beyond this point? Here's the thing. My issue with this boils down to these guys being political actors, meaning on one side of the case, the Democratic Party not really putting forth anything that's going to substantially change anything. Yes, getting background checks may help. Cutting down on the clip size would definitely help. Even outright banning guns, which nobody is even putting up for debate, would at the very least cut down on the amount of gun violence. But in all of these conversations that people are having, the fundamental thing that they fundamentally miss asking is, why do we have this violence in the first place? Why does it exist in the first place, right? I mean, if you're really trying to solve a particular issue, when you start there, why does it exist? Why is this a component of our particular society? Yes, we try to look at ourselves as these kind of individuals atomized within a society, but ultimately this is happening a lot. And because this is happening a lot, we can't say this is some kind of one-off. We have to give it or say that it's some principle of society that we exist in. The Republican position and the Democratic position continues or completely abdicates that point. This is my point. They're political actors. Saying that they're going to offer prayers and their condolences, meaning Republicans. Democrats, some of them saying the same thing. But some of them may earnestly believe that background checks is the way to go about this. But all of them miss asking, why? Why does this happen in the United States at the level that this happens in the United States? This doesn't happen like talking about elsewhere. Why? And that should be the place in which you start to have any honest conversation about guns. And a few things will become massively apparent. That on the first case, the mass violence, meaning somebody going into a school, somebody going into a bar and shooting up a lot of people, it's not the context to which you want to have this gun debate. That is not the majority of people who are harmed by guns. And to make my point clear, let's see. "2017 deemed deadliest year for mass shootings in modern history. As the new year inches closer, Americans reflect on devastating events that made up the 2017 deadliest year of mass shootings in modern history. According to Gun Violence Archive, non-profit organization and continuously tracks gun-related deaths and injury reports on the official records, there have been 345 mass shootings in America in 2017 alone. And even more daunting, 2 of the 5 deadliest mass shootings in U.S. history has occurred in just the span of 35 days. We've had as many gun shootings as number of people in the country itself. Second part, mass shootings are a bad way to understand gun violence. Now, here's the thing. When you look at America and you compare it to other nations, because understand, one of the best ways to understand yourself is your comparison to somebody else. How do you know who you are if you don't have anything to compare yourself to? How do U.S. culture compares with the world in 5 charts? Americans own nearly half, 48% of the estimated 650 civilian-owned guns worldwide. Think about that. This country, we make up 5% of the globe, and we own half of the estimated civilian-owned guns all across the world, the entire planet. Americans own more guns per capita than residents of any other country. This is American. Yemen is the closest. Switzerland behind that. Finland, Serbia, Cyprus, Saudi Arabia. But we blow them away. America makes up less than 5% of the world's population, but holds 31% of global mass shooters. 31% of the mass shootings that take place across the entire planet takes place in the United States. The question becomes, why? it's not an individualistic thing at that point if this is coming out in these levels. Meaning, if this is happening this often, and it seems to be specific to this country and the levels that it happens, then there's something wrong with your country. There's some organization of your society that is creating negative externalities that have people like this who believe that for whatever reason that they're incentivized to get a weapon and break and destroy other human beings, their fellow human beings. The question is why? No one has asked that question. Let's keep going. Gun homicide rates are 25.2 times higher in the United States than other high-income countries. Look at that graph. That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. Worldwide, the country with the highest gun homicide rates are Central America and South America. Globally, the United States sees fewer gun-related murders than many of the southern neighbors. According to the Small Arms Survey, El Salvador is currently one of the most gun-related murders in the world. The guns, more than 90 for every 100,000 people. Yeah, but South America is not really our comparison. The comparison, honestly, if you're being earnest and you're talking about other Western nations, that's abysmal. Look at these numbers. Gun-related deaths. I've just told you also that you've had more gun deaths than you've had just as many gun deaths, meaning mass shootings, as people or as days in a year. Regardless of what your position is on guns, you have to accept that this is somewhat of a problem. Now, whatever side you come down on, shouldn't you ask why? Why does this happen in the United States at such a rate that it happens in the United States? This is not an argument to take away people's guns, nor is it an argument to keep people's guns. I'm asking the very basic, bare bones question of why does it happen in the first place? That's a technical question. That's not a political question. That's a technical question. Meaning, you would have scientists, sociologists, psychologists study this particular phenomena and come to a conclusion as to why. Because understand, you don't have free will in this case. Your society, for whatever reason, puts certain ideas and things in you. There's a certain culture. There's a certain country that you exist in. There's certain processes in you that link yourselves in this kind of tribal way. But at the end of the day, all who you are is what was put into you. Now, there's a workable point of view inside of you that weigh and measure and everything else, but that is massively influenced by the external environment that you exist in. There is no such thing as you without you existing in some societal framework. And that societal framework pushes and tugs on whoever you end up being. How can you be somebody beyond what you've been experienced or what you've experienced? My point is, if that person decided that they wanted to blow something up or go and shoot somebody, there are societal influence that are pushing that person to do that. The question becomes, what are the societal influences that are causing that person to do that? First thing, mass shootings are a poor way of understanding the gun issue. So this is 538. First, they're rare and people doing the shootings are different. The majority of gun deaths in America aren't even homicides, let alone by mass shootings. 2/3 of the more than 33,000 gun deaths take place in the United States every year are suicides. The majority of deaths using guns, meaning when you get into the numbers, how many gun deaths are caused just every day, just randomly every day? We're not talking about the mass shootings. Yes, we're including mass shootings at some point, but we're including those as rare events, even though they're events that take place in more than any other nation. Either you're trying to solve the gun issue or not. And if you're trying to solve the gun issue, you need to look into what are the main uses of guns from the standpoint of killing people. And a large number of those uses are people using those weapons to destroy themselves. Now, whether they had a gun or not, if they're using a weapon to destroy themselves, they're using a weapon to destroy themselves. It doesn't have to be a gun. It's not them going somewhere and blowing a bunch of people up. It's them ending their own lives. You don't need a gun for that. A gun helps magnificently, but you don't need a gun for that. Let's keep going. Again, if our goal is talking about getting to the root cause of what's causing the gun problem, then we have to ask these questions and we need to go into these places. And while people who commit suicide and people who commit mass shootings tend to be white and male, suicide victims tend to be older. The median age of mass shooters, according to the report, is 34, with very few over 50. Suicide, however, plagues the elderly as much as it does the middle age. So what causes suicides? We're talking stress, pressure. We're talking an unforgiving economic system that allows extreme vulnerabilities within regards to people and their lives. At that point, we're getting into economics. We're not purely getting into this thing of people flipping out for no reason. Those people are responding to the stressors that are in their environment, and they're responding in a way that's commensurate with what they understand and what they've come across in their lives. It just so happens that we are a violent culture. Let's keep going. Second, the people killed in mass shootings are different from the majority of homicides. Most gun murder victims are men between the ages of 15 and 34. 60% of black women are black. Of any race and age are far less likely to be murdered by gun, unless that gun is part of a mass shooting. There are 50% of people who die are women, and at least 54% of mass shootings involve domestic or family violence, with the perpetrator shooting a current or former partner or relative. Like, understand what they're saying. Like they're talking about background checks, and they're talking about these things of this petty legislation for guns. Those things kind of miss the point. The mass shootings are not the main things that takes place. We're talking about inter-family affairs, and we're also talking about people shooting themselves from the standpoint of suicide. We're also talking about poverty. Let's take a look at this one. Violence is a symptom of poverty, not the cause. They're making a point in the article that if you put people in economically stressful situations, those people are going to respond in a way that, like anybody else will respond, to try to make ends meet. I don't have access to my needs. How do I make my ends meet? In which case they end up with this drug trade. Well, this is business that's completely unregulated, and this business tends to get violent. So they're making this argument that one of the drivers of guns, or of violence in this case, is poverty. Poverty being a driver of violence. Now, 33% of the 50%, half of the American public are either working a low-wage job or in a poverty condition. You're driving your society to a certain amount of violence. Like, this is not purely just human beings acting as human beings act. This is human beings acting according to the environment that they find themselves. And in this case, you have a society in which they need to make their ends meet, in which case they try to make their ends meet however they need to make it, legal or otherwise. This, in which case, leading to A, a pressure cooker where people either commit suicide, or B, externalize this from the standpoint of relatives and everybody else. But ultimately, the main shootings is not mass shootings. It's human beings interacting with other human beings. How do you deal with that particular issue? And the moment that you hit this issue, you get into this idea of economics. You have a stressful society. That stressful society leads people to act in aberrant ways. Some of those aberrant ways are expressed in this kind of violence that they enact on the world and their fellow human beings. The more vulnerable the people are in the society, the more prone to violence those people are. And to make my point, this is a sociology text on mass homicide. Why do people commit mass shootings? In two separate ways. Either he was perceived as totally insane and socially dysfunctional, while the other deception was to extreme, but the same person, driven by radical right-wing ideology. The debate was quite polarized, but where it was seldom asked whether Breivik could be both insane and politically extreme. It is a logical fallacy to put all the weight exclusively on one of these two factors. Breivik's actions may be seen, rather seen as some result of a combination of extreme psychological constitution, which happens to coincide with the attraction to an extremely violent ideology. Although they differ, both of these two perspectives explain. All right, let's go up here so it explains perspectives. No matter what kind of perspective one uses, there is not just one event that occurs and a person chooses to become a mass murderer, and the motivation builds over time. If we look to the social sciences, there are two main perspectives that try to explain crime in general. On one hand, we have an individual model, which focuses on the individual responsibility. In this view, every person is free to choose whether he or she will act to fulfill his needs. The perpetrator may also be seen as ill or disordered. On the other hand, on the other side of the table stands the societal model, which states that the problems evolve from factors surrounding, that is, dysfunctional, attributable to society. Although they differ, both of the perspectives may explain different aspects of mass shootings. They do not necessarily compete, but rather contemplate each other. If we start with the individual model, it is common for mass murders to carry feelings of anger and aggression. However, such feelings do not necessarily lead to violent outcomes, since every individual is freely choose whether or not to act upon the destructive emotions. If we take the example of Adam Lanza, he had over time developed an impaired and dysfunctional thinking process. He suffered from paranoid delusions, but became obsessed over the idea of revenge towards his mother that he had a poor relation with. He may also have felt a large amount of people were against him. This bears resemblance with the profile of the perpetrators from other mass shootings, who often feel that people are after them or that society is evil in some form. The way a person perceives society may then work as a trigger that decides whether he develops motivation to go to such extreme steps. No matter how delusional or aggressive a person may be in the first place, the onset of violence is most of the time due to interaction between interpersonality traits and external factors. Meaning, your society has an impact on how you behave. I mean, think about it. How are you going to get things in you that were not put in you by society? Yes, there are going to be some things that you kind of evolve on, but think of all the things that make up you. For all intents and purposes, is you pushing back against the society, or you accepting something of that particular society. Ultimately, everything that makes you you is from the society in which you find yourself. Nothing is making you up from Vulcan because you've never been to Vulcan, you've never been exposed to Vulcans. Everything that's you comes from your society. You may have a workable point of view that you use to look at that information and weigh that information and determine what's true, false, and come to your own conclusions. But ultimately, all of it is still a function of your society. And the question becomes, what are the levers and incentives in a person, in a society, that drives people to behave in this way? Or at the very least, trigger something in their workable point of view that allows them to justify destroying their fellow human beings. My point in this is you have societal stressors. So in some case, poverty, and I've just shown poverty leads to violence. Now, no, it's not going to be in every case, but everyone is somewhat different. How they respond to those things in their situations are somewhat different. The fact that they respond to something shows that human beings respond a particular way in a particular society. I know people like to give this stuff free will, but this is not a free will thing, especially if this is happening a lot in comparison to other nations. This video is going long, but I'm just trying to make this point that gun violence goes beyond just the person having a gun or having access to going to background checks. You have to get to the root cause of why people behave in this way in violence. You can't use mass shootings as purely the single and only thing, especially when you're talking about almost a mass shooting every day. You have to get to the root cause of A, what are the main uses of guns? Meaning we got to this idea of suicides and people killing people that they know and family and relatives. And yeah, there's the outlier being the mass killings. Those people who are in mass killings often feel atomized, meaning they feel alienated from the society that they're in. Why do they feel alienated in the society that they're in? Now, for the other ones, for the violence, that goes directly to economics. Now, my point in this is Democrats are never going to touch the economic argument. They're never going to talk the economic dimension to this. They will talk about the NRA. They will talk about guns. They will talk about either putting in legislation for guns. But the moment that you get to, hey, there's a larger systemic effect that people that are driving people to exhibit aberrant behavior. Let's fix that societal defect, as opposed to just going after individuals, because there are always going to be more individuals. Fact is, if a person wanted to commit suicide, they don't need a gun to commit suicide. Even if you ban guns tomorrow, they still would commit suicide in probably the same numbers. If a person wanted to kill somebody else in the family, yes, it's easier to do it with a gun. That's fair enough. But isn't it more important to understand what is that thing that's ensconced in the individual and in the society itself that gets them and propels them to do the particular crime? That is a monstrous aspect of the society. And the question that needs to be asked is, what is that monstrous aspect? Not necessarily this knee-jerk reaction of taking away guns. Taking away guns does not get rid of that monstrous aspect. It just means that the monstrous aspect expressed in other ways, not necessarily through the trigger pull. I am not for getting rid of all guns. I mean, if they got rid of all guns tomorrow and only use guns at shooting ranges and hunting, I would be perfectly okay with that. There's no issue at all with me. I don't think we need those things walking around. The more fundamental question to me is, why are some people of the society so terrified where they feel they need to walk around with a gun? And B, what is the monstrous aspect of society that drives people to commit either suicide or the destruction of other people or the alienated feelings that they have? I would say that the solution needs to start at asking those questions as to why and how are guns mostly used and what are the death rates that mostly take place, not starting with just a political catch-all just to make it look like work was being done. We can have an argument on what is the level at which people have access to guns, but let's at very least make acknowledge that the issue is more complicated than just passing a law that takes away people's guns. It's more complicated than that. It's not that simple of saying we'll just pass a law to do background checks. Do you want to get to the root cause of it? Meaning, what's causing these people to commit suicide at the rate they commit suicide? What's causing these people to kill family members? What caused these people to flip out? And I make the case that that is stress. There's one last point I want to make. Poverty adversely affects the brain structures of human beings. Think about that. Like, the very act of being poor changes the brain of the individual that's poor. Not having access to their needs, seeing this kind of unfairness built into the society. The brain is deformed by that. It's an amazing thing. Let's take a look at this. And mind you, half of the public is poor. The overwhelming majority of the world is poor. I think it's like 60 or 70% lives off $10 a day. And beyond that point, the majority of Americans, I think like 60%, if they needed to come up with a $500 bill for either a car note or something else, they wouldn't be able to do it. Poverty is ensconced. This is not even talking about the lead that's all throughout the United States that people are drinking that are deforming their brains. This is purely just the state of being of this capitalistic society. The video tells the story of Malala Yousafzai, the Nobel Prize winner from Pakistan, who at 15 survived being shot in the head by Taliban while riding a bus in 2012. The 15-year-old boy watching the clip on the laptop inside the University of Southern California Brain and Creative Institute seemed unmoved by Yousafzai's story. His face is blank, his shoulders are slumped. An interviewer asks, how does it make him feel? He shrugs, I don't know. Nothing. The researcher moves on, asking what kind of person he hopes to be. Nice, he says. Do you want to go to college? Yeah. Do you have plans to go to college? I haven't thought about it. What kind of job do you want? I haven't thought about it. He is one of 73 low-income teens USC neurologist Mary Heron Imodoriyang has been tracking in a 5-year study designed to understand how culture and family relationships, exposure to violence, and other factors shape the human mind. Test subjects from throughout Southern California watched 40 clips, each depicting a different true story told by the person who lived it. Some stories, like Yousafzai's, were chosen because they were heart-tugging and inspirational. The teenagers watched parts of the clips again, while insiders at the MRI machine and other brain researchers are recorded. 2 years later, they are called back for the Brain and Creative Lab Hybrid Learning Center and Campus Innovation Hub with an MRI scanning lab, meaning offices, modern art and photography, galleries, as well as performing halls that offers literary readings, scientific presentations, and mellow concerts featuring Yo-Yo Ma. The testing process is repeated and tracked changes over time. Early results show a troubling trend. Kids who grow up in higher levels of violence as a backdrop in their lives based on MRI scans have weaker real-time neural connections and interactions in part of the brain involved in awareness, judgment, and ethical and emotional processing. Imodoriyang's work is contributing to a growing field called the neuroscience poverty. Though it seems largely based in correlations between brain patterns in particular environments, the research points to a disturbing conclusion. Poverty and the conditions that often accompany it, violence, excessive noise, chaos at the home, pollution, malnutrition, abuse, and parents without jobs can affect the interactions, formations, and pruning of connections in young brains. Two recent influential reports cracked open a public conversation on the matter. In one, researchers found that impoverished children had less gray matter, brain tissue that supports information processing and executive behavior. In their hippocampus, involved in memory, frontal lobe, involved in decision making, problem solving, impulse control, judgment, social and emotional behavior, and temporal lobe, involved in language, visual and auditory processing, and self-awareness. Working together, these brain areas are crucial for following instructions, paying attention, and overall learning. Some of the key academic success. Ultimately, the very state of poverty changes the brain in a way where the person has a more difficult time in understanding and being more empathetic. It is an amazing thing. Ultimately, the very act of living in this society contributes to aberrant behavior and aberrant conditions of the body itself. If you want to get to the root cause of gun violence, I would say start at the economic cause. Start at the pressure cooker that you create in your society. Start at getting rid of the vulnerabilities in the society. This will require Democrats to address their donors, not necessarily just parade about this idea of background checks. Address their donors. How do you solve those issues of poverty? And that's where you address the gun violence issue. I mean, if you're talking about the massive number of gun violence that take place every day, that's how you address that issue, dealing with the pressures and the vulnerabilities of modern day society. The larger issue in the sense of mass gun violence, again, this is this thing about the people feeling alienated. In individualistic societies, those tend to be higher, meaning they tend to have a higher number of gun crime in this way. Why is your society so individualistic? And is it possible that the capitalistic system itself and the rapaciousness of it creates this idea that people are individuals as opposed to being this kind of societal collective? The very model itself drives the behavior of large killings or large groups of killings. Democrats are never going to address the actual issue. They're never going to get to the economic solution because it adversely affects their donors. They will use these kids, they will use this march as absorbing this march, and they will use it to attack Republicans because Republicans don't want to do anything on it. So a modicum of something on it looks like you're doing something on it, even if that something is wildly not inappropriate or wildly undermining to actually getting something done. Yes, background checks are nice, but background checks are not going to fix your issue. As for taking guns away, look, I think the argument that needs to take place is what causes people to feel so terrified they need to walk around with their guns? And beyond what causes people so terrified, the moment that you if you agree with me that people shouldn't walk around with nuclear weapons, then we agree that there needs to be some scale and level to which people walk around with guns and the type of guns. I am perfectly okay with taking all guns away and just using them in hunting and things like that. By the same token, I find it to be unrealistic seeing how many guns are in the United States. But certainly there should be a scale, and certainly there should be some regulation against it. But it needs to go beyond tepid regulation. It needs to go beyond us determining scale into getting to the actual heart of the matter. The technical question of what causes these people to act in this way. What causes these people to kill themselves? What causes these people to kill family members? What causes these people to feel they need to destroy multiple relatives or multiple people in their societal system? What causes it? And the moment that you get to the point of what causes it, you can start working towards solutions. I don't claim to be an expert in this. I do look at the systemic impact of this and look at the systemic reasons that could drive people to this level of violence. And like I said, one of the main drivers of this is poverty. It's poverty. So I'm going to end that here. Yeah, let's see who's here. Oh, wow. I have a lot of people here. Democrats support single prayer munitions for all. Balthazar 228. I can't open carry a katana, sheath or unsheath. Essentially, I can't carry a sword. What allows them to carry a gun? Look, I am torn on this argument. Part of me feels like the main issue here, the main thing that needs to be addressed, is the monstrous reasoning that society influences someone, incentivizes someone to do this. Whether it's commit self-harm, whether it's harming someone else. What is the main driver? Also, we need to take into account most of this violence is gang related. Like, so if you take out the gang related violence and you just deal with the violence that deals with individuals every day using guns in ways that was not intended. I think that's the key point. What's causing that? What's driving that? and to be earnest about it and put your society up and say, these are defects in our society and the way our society is run, and we need to fix these things that are problematic in our society that's driving this particular behavior. If they're not doing this, then it's all political gamesmanship and political rhetoric. That's the truth of it. Jamal looks tired today. Yeah, I haven't been to bed. Sorry, it's Alex. I haven't been to bed. I don't sleep well at night. I've started doing the show in a way where when I get the impetus to do it, I just do it. But yeah, I don't sleep all that well. Jim Hayden, thank you, Jim Hayden. And Beltazar, thank you, Beltazar. Guys, I appreciate the donations. Bernard Foster also, thank you. And when you guys leave a super cash, feel free to put that out there. Like, feel free to give a comment. I like the comments. I think the comments are interesting and illuminating. Shad Garrett, poverty leads to poor nutrition and brain development. The old racist science took this info and drew conclusions that was genetics while ignoring the conditions of impoverished people. Exactly. Like, when you get to the bottom of it, you have all of these people living in abject poverty. And the fact is, science is saying that that abject poverty is having a detrimental effect on their brain development. You add to that the environmental factors that these people need to overcome from the standpoint of overcoming poverty. And what do you do to make your ends meet? They're not exhibiting behavior that's aberrant. They're exhibiting the behavior you would expect them to exhibit based on the conditions to which they're living in. It is not purely this thing of personal choice. Ultimately, the person is trying to survive. And for whatever reason, society has made it difficult to do so. The question goes beyond the guns. The question goes beyond the guns. Poverty exacerbates violence, but our culture teaches everyone that violence is the last fuck you to society. And you're right, Tabitha, you're right. Look at all the movies. Like, in all of the movies, the plot usually involves the hero beating the shit out of the supervillain. And this is looked at as being perfectly okay because the violence is used to justify protecting something else. This humanitarian reason for violence. But it's not just that. Look at John Wick. I love John Wick. But yeah, it epitomizes this thing of violence. We cheer John Wick on as he goes through murdering a lot of other people. I mean, look at the Vampire Diaries. Look at all of these shows use violence as the tool of accomplishing ends. Why are we shocked? Like, I'm more shocked that people are shocked. Why are we shocked? Agreed. It's called Ideation We're Living Brazil. Oh, I remember the movie. Bernard Foster, suburban Trump country wants AR-15 ban. Yeah, I mean, like I said, we can have an argument on those type of things, but the question goes deeper than just the guns themselves. But if you're talking about tepid legislation, yeah, some legislation is better than none. But let's be honest, that does in no way touches the main issue. Jazzy Ewing, our government acts like maniacs all over the planet, invade, bomb, murder civilians, torture, then flood our country with guns at alarming rates. Of course, we have a country full of maniacs. That's a good point. We bomb and kill all across the world. And the thing that we're complaining about is the thing that happens at home. Like, we have special forces in 70% of the globe. Those special forces aren't there to give roses and buttercups. Those special forces are there to kill and maim and shoot people in the face. All over the globe. We allow our country to do this. They put in John Bolton as a military advisor. That should tell you everything. Why are we shocked that these things occur at home? Simon and Garfunkel. Fear, Second Amendment, is the Nat Turner Amendment. Fear, oh, I see. The Nat Turner Amendment. Essentially people being scared of slave raids, and so they cling to their guns. You know, the wild part about it is the NRA and Ronald Reagan was against gun rights in California because African Americans was using those guns. Their gun thing is purely for a certain demographic. It's always been for a certain demographic. They don't necessarily come out in force to support black gun ownership. White gun ownership, no issue with. Yeah, agreed. Absolutely agreed. Capitalism is violence against poor people. It needs poor people to scare the middle class. But by standards of capitalism, if you're poor, you're a failure. Yeah, and they internalize this. I mean, I think part of the issue is there's research that shows that people die sooner when they're in conditions of poverty and conditions of lack. And this goes all the way up to millionaires. Like, it's the social stigma that's associated with existing in the culture and knowing that the culture is somewhat fundamentally uneven. And that has this kind of headwind that takes years off of people's lives. It's amazing research. Look, Clemente, when you get progressive voices, Glock Jamal, when you pry from his cold dead heads. I'm not saying take people's guns away. I don't know if that will solve the issue. I mean, ultimately, there is, and I know you're joking, Luca. Ultimately, there is something in us, from a societal standpoint, that glorifies the use of guns in the way that we glorify the use of guns. There is militaristically believe it's okay to go killing people abroad. And now you have at home where you have people scream about their Second Amendment rights. Like I said, just because something is written down, there is a societal impact that has to be taken into account when dealing with issues of things that are in the Constitution, even things that are written in the Constitution. I mean, like I said, this idea of slavery being written out of the Constitution at one point, it's like somebody saying because there was slavery in the Constitution or allowed in the Constitution, there should always be the institution of slavery, and I'm going to cling to my slave to pry my slave from my cold dead hands. It's like, come on. Existence in and of itself is not a justification for its existence. It can be changed. It can be tweaked. It can be modified. It can be debated in regards to how extensive the armaments that people use. It's like, come on, let's be honest. If a person presents a threat, that person should be detained. MJ Wing. Yeah, the problem with that, MJ Wing, is what does it mean to be a threat? And do you trust the people and authorities to make the determination of who is a threat? That's the problem with this. That's what I'm saying. It makes more sense to get to the root cause. Put your society on the witness stand and figure out what's causing it. It gets... The decision space becomes undesirable when you deal with it from the standpoint of the end result. Like imagine the situation where a state comes out and says, okay, we're going to detain people. We're going to give cops the ability to detain people who look suspicious or act suspicious. Okay. Do you really want cops having that power to randomly detain people for maybe a day or 2 days? Do you trust them with that power? Do you trust them with the power where they can take your property away from you, take money away from you, legally, even though you haven't committed a crime and even though you haven't been arrested? I'm asking, do you really trust law enforcement with these additional powers? The answer is, I don't. No. I don't at all. So I understand that there's an issue in that case, but by the same token, I don't trust them with that power. So again, I get back to the point of dealing with the problem at its inception, not at the end point. Dealing with the problem at the end point has certain consequences associated with it coming from a limiting of freedom, whereas dealing with it in its inception, meaning where does it start? Cuts down on the number of guns, cuts down on the number of killings, cuts down on that monstrous instinct of us that feels the need to destroy other human beings and ourselves. Democrats and Republicans don't touch that. They don't touch it. All right, guys, I'm going to end this one because I have a few more that I want to do. I thank you guys for showing up on this. I got to be honest. I didn't think anybody would be interested in this topic. I find it to be a big deal, though. We're walking around with hand cannons. And nobody asks the question of why do these people feel they need to walk around with hand cannons? Can I walk around with a missile launcher? Where's the limit? If they take away all the guns, I would be okay with that. By the same token, I'm also okay with them keeping guns here and limiting the usage. I care more about why, as opposed to just this kind of political answer of, well, let's just add more regulation associated with it. Why is the thing that's important to me? So I am not hard one way or the other in regards to this particular issue, meaning I can accept all of the guns being taken away if it's going to cut down on the number of people being killed. By the same token, I can accept if those guns stay. You do need to end the clip size. The clip size needs to come down. Either way, whatever you choose to do, the clip size needs to come down. And my reasoning for this is, and I'll end it on this. When you have a mass shooting, and that mass shooter has a 30-round clip, it takes 30 rounds, and it takes that much more time for somebody to actually get that person when he's trying to change his clip. In the last shooting, The only time that they tackled that person, I think it was the politician that was shot. I can't think of her name. But the only way they got him was when he started to change over his clip. It was allowed a pause and a moment of respite that somebody could use to take him down. Even if you're in the pro-gun camp, certainly you can agree that lowering the clip size in no way adversely affects the person who's using a gun, especially if they're using it for legal reasons and legal ways. So I'll leave it at that. I hope that made sense. And yes, I'm walking the line because I don't know, I feel fully about this issue. I'm not full-throated one way or the other because I don't think one way or the other deals with the main problem. So I'll leave it at that. All right, guys, if you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon. Thanks, everyone.